So welcome everyone. I'm Nina Collins. This is Raging Gracefully. This is the podcast for Revel, which is, as most of you know, hopefully a social platform, the social platform for women over 40. We're an events and social platform where you can come and talk to women and find events and create groups and find friends and get resources, and it's free, and we want people to sign up, and we want you all to refer your friends. And this is part of our weekly, every Wednesday at 3, I do a live interview on webinar with an expert. And every third Wednesday of the month, it's with Dr. Debbie Magids, therapist in New York, excellent therapist. She has a website and Instagram. And as I always disclaim, she was my therapist for many years. I'm no longer in therapy, but I really love Debbie, and she kind of changed my life. And so we decided to do this fun show together. So yes, we would really love audience participation. So we encourage you guys certainly to write in the chat, but feel free to use the hand raising feature, and I will call on you and then you can speak. We can't see you and we won't identify you by last name, but you would just be in the part of the conversation, which would be really fun to have more voices in the podcast. I think Debbie and I have been doing this for 5 or 6 months, and I don't think, maybe once we've had people,
last month, last podcast, people spoke.
Yeah, so we'd like to kind of warm you guys up and get you to do that more. And maybe it's on us to come up with a subject that really forces you to speak. So we'll think about that.
Well, because last month was on romantic relationships and relationships. A lot of people had a lot to say, but maybe we'll have a lot to say. It's okay. Yeah.
All right. So what we're talking about today is kind of new year, new you. How do you make healthy resolutions? And as I was preparing for it today, I was thinking it's actually kind of hilarious because I don't usually make resolutions. Like, I think they're kind of stupid. So that's something else we should talk about. Like, are they stupid? And what's the point? But I took my kids on vacation over Christmas, and I have 4 adult kids in their 20s, and also one of my son's girlfriend was with us. So it was 5 people in their 20s. And it was a good trip in a lot of ways, but it was also emotionally really exhausting for me. And I felt a lot of anxiety on this trip. I was alone. I learned a bunch of things about how maybe this is a period in my life with my kids. I should do these things a little differently. But I did on that trip make a resolution. I decided that in 2022, I want to become I want a little more emotional distance from my children. I want to work. I think our boundaries are quite good now, but I also just want to pull back a little, like let them call me. Like, I don't have to call them all the time. I don't have to know what's going on all the time. Like, just pull back a teeny bit. And then what's ironic about it is I'm dialing in now from Montana, where I'm here because 2 of my daughters are moving and I'm helping them find a place to live. And, I didn't have anyone when I was in my 20s helping me find a place to live. So I don't know. What's your resolution, Debbie?
So I wanted to start off. I actually don't make resolutions, and I don't like resolutions. And I'm going to explain why, but I do like the new year. And I like to call them reflections and times to reset. But the reason why I like the word reflections is because I think it's really important to look backwards, see where you were, where you grew that year, and where you want to keep going, right? And so, because my whole life is about ongoing growth and self-awareness. And I think that it's an ongoing process. And the reason why I think resolutions, the word itself has a connotation that, like, starting January 1, everything that I've been doing my whole life, I'm going to change because it's turned January 1st. Are you there?
You just disappeared for a second, but I get what you said. Yeah.
Okay. So, and the thing is, every year people make similar resolutions because the things that they're trying to change are so ingrained, they're so habitual at this point, and they have so much more to do with deeper things, right? So let's just, for example, everyone always wants to lose weight starting January 1. Everyone knows what to do to lose weight. We're all intelligent people, but people can't seem to do it. And it's not about not knowing how or declaring on January 1, everything that has gotten in my way my whole life is going to stop January 1. The reason why resolutions fail is because everyone can have some willpower. So you can do it for a couple of weeks or a month, but eventually you start to fall off because there's deeper things, there's more ingrained things. And people make big, grand resolutions where you have to sort of make small shifts that can be changed one thing at a time. And that's sort of the process of therapy. So, I
Right.
mean,
Well, that totally,
yeah,
completely makes sense. I mean, it'd be like me saying I want to be less impatient, which I could say and do, but it would have to be something I was working on continually. I can't just be like, okay,
right.
this year, this January, my impatience will disappear. That's ridiculous.
Correct. So that would be to me a resolution or a reflection. Like, I'm someone who's impatient. I want to continue to work on this. I've made some headway. I've gained on it a little bit, but it's still showing up. So let me reflect some more. Let me remember why I'm impatient. Let me do some of the deeper work and let me try again and try again and try again. Because the whole point on change is gaining on it. It doesn't happen in an automatic fell swoop of, I've declared it, it's going to happen, right? Like you
Right.
just said, I'm going to be a little more distant from my kids, but something came up. So there you are helping them in Montana because that's what you're going to do. But you're going to work on it and you're going to see that it's not so easy to do because it's habitual at this point. It's part of what you've always done.
Right.
And so anyone listening, and I would love to hear from people to think about who you are, where you want to go, what are the things that have been in your way that you keep trying to change that you aren't, and trying to find like one small achievable goal in the bigger goal. Like for instance, I have gained weight over the last round of years. I had a whole bunch of surgeries. I put on some weight, lost it, and then COVID came. So I put it back on. I've been carrying some extra weight that I've never carried. Right. So it's New Year's. I'm like, okay, reset. I'm going to lose all the weight that I gained versus my goal is I'm going to try to eat a little less sugar and I'm going to try to exercise more. That's my goal, right? Versus, I'm going to just never eat anything I like again and blah, blah, blah. So it's what can I choose in my goal for the year that I've been unsuccessful, and how can I try to shift a little bit for success?
Yeah.
And then add the next small attainable goal. So,
oh, Debbie just went out again for a sec. Oh, there she is.
I see you.
Okay,
I haven't lost you yet.
It's just your voice that goes in and out a teeny bit. I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience, either in the chat or if you want to raise your hand, about if you can think of an example in your own life where this applies. Oh,
Not
Cindy.
supposed to say last names.
Oh, sorry. I'm not supposed to say last names. We can edit that out.
Yes, we just guaranteed no last names.
No last names. We will edit that out. Cindy, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, well, first I wanted to say is I had a lot of concerns like you, Nina. I have 3 children. I hovered over them. I was the PTA mom. I was all this stuff. So then when they're older, it's very hard to let go. And what happened with me is my oldest daughter got married and I felt I could honestly let go. Not completely.
Yeah.
It was just, she's in her new life as a married woman. So I don't have to hover. It's now her life. Whereas before she was with this person for 6 years. So it wasn't like she wasn't in a relationship, but I was still more of, she's my daughter and I have to take care of her. And then it just changed. It within me, it changed. So I don't know what will be the impetus for you.
Well, it helps me to hear that, actually. And one of my children, I think, will get married in the next year or two. And I actually had that thought. I thought, well, then he or she, I would try and protect their privacy, he or she will be not my problem, but I did kind of think, is that going to help me like kind of have a little more distance? Because it's not that I don't want to be close to them, right? And I'm sure you understand this. I adore them, but I feel like
absolutely
right. I feel like it'll be healthier for everyone if I am a little less engaged. And so I'm glad that that's happened for you. Thank you for sharing that. And I really relate. Do you have a particular reflection about what you achieved last year and what you want to get a little better at this year?
Well, I became a lot more patient because I had to. I mean, we couldn't go out, we couldn't do things we normally did. So, and then, you wanted a roll of paper towel. Well, you had to be patient because maybe your store was out of it, which in America, that never happens. When are they ever really out of anything? So, so yes, I learned to be a lot more patient with other people and a lot more patient with myself.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. That's great. So it was imposed on you and you were sort of forced to be a way that you've never been. Has that carried over now that that imposition is not on you anymore? And how has that carried over?
It's still on me. I'm not going out right now. I'm isolating during this Omicron.
Okay.
So I kind of imposed it on myself again because it's really scary to me.
Yes.
I've had 14 surgeries and a whole bunch of other things. So I don't want to get sick. I don't want to go in the hospital anymore. I'm done.
Yes.
I just learned more patience, and it wasn't that I sat down and I thought I'm going to try and be more patient. I
Mhm.
think New Year's resolutions are ridiculous because no one makes realistic goals. It's
Mhm.
like I learned, if you want to exercise, do it for 5 minutes every day.
Mhm.
And then next week, maybe you'll increase it to 10 minutes every other day. You
Mhm.
have to make it. And I also learned, what was it? It's 21 days makes it a habit. And is it 90 days makes it a lifestyle?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. Well, thank you, Cindy, very much. I'm gonna,
And I just wanted to just add in what Cindy seems to know sort of organically is the small achievable goals. Very small goals leads to the big goal. And if anyone's really interested in this topic, there's a great book called Atomic Habits. And it really talks about, I mean, it's a great book about how you take small achievable goals and you end up with the big end goal. And he uses the oh my God, the bicycle. What's the race? The bike people that bike. What's the big race?
like a triathlon.
No, but no, there's the big race in France.
Oh, the Tour de France.
Tour de France. Like he uses those expert bikers, and he uses that as an example of how even like changing the seat on a bicycle helped them get faster and faster. So I would highly recommend that book for anyone who is trying to make changes of ingrained habits and have not been successful.
That's good to know about. I've actually never heard of that book, so I'm going to write it down. So Catherine says, I made a vision board for the second year in a row, and one of the things I'm going to work on is being healthier. I've had IBS for many years, but have recently realized that my eating habits, binging sweets, are a factor. It only took me 30 years to realize this. Other goals for the coming year is to get another pet, since I'm without one for the first time in many years, and I want to make friends in my new state, but COVID. I feel hopeful about my health, though. I agree. I think that's something that a lot of us are constantly working on, right? Is getting healthier. And I totally relate to what you say, Catherine, about it took 30 years to realize this. I think that's just the reality of life. I watch it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I watch again, some of my kids struggle with certain health things and I can't tell them what to do. They have to figure it out themselves. I think that's a thing for all of us.
But I would have a follow-up question. So to get healthy for your IBS, what is it that you're doing? Like, what's the one thing that you are going to change at a time versus it being, I want to get healthy. I binge on sweets too much. Like, is there something she's put in place already? Or how are you going to make friends? Getting a pet is easier. Just go do it, right?
Oh, good. Catherine's going to come on and talk to us about her IBS.
Oh, good.
Let's see if it works. Catherine, are you there?
Okay, so I'm getting an alert from the tech end, Catherine, that you have an older version of Zoom installed. So I have to promote you to panelists to be able to talk, which means you may hop on video. So if you want to let me know in the chat if you're comfortable with that, I can do it or not.
This is so funny. This is so Zoomy. Focus on habits, someone says in the chat, seems to be the theme of 2022. Catherine may have decided not to come on, but anyway, I agree with what Debbie's saying, changing one or two things at a time. And I also agree with what someone just said about 90 days makes a life, 21 days makes a habit and 90 days makes a lifestyle. I hope. I've been on Weight Watchers now for like 6 months and I feel like it's a lifestyle, but I could always detour.
Yeah, no, it can work that way. And then you can always slide back in a big way. And that's why, listen, I'm always going to promote sort of deeper things that you want to look at and what's blocking you from reaching your goals. Like Nina, you and I did a webinar somewhere over COVID just about eating habits and stuff. And I shared with you that it's been hard for me to give up sugar, which is what I'm trying to do because it's deeply related to a connection to my dad. He's no longer here. We always ate a lot of sweets young. It was a very happy thing. We had all these rituals around, breakfast and chocolate eggs and sugar with French toast. And so sometimes it's not just, oh, I'm addicted to sugar. There's a deeper meaning to something that we're trying to give up. So I also urge people to look at those deeper meanings and why we're connected to certain habits.
That's interesting. Catherine, who tried to come on, said that she gave up chocolate because it was making her sick. And she said, my big clue was when I kept a food diary for a year and realized I wasn't listing any desserts. That's interesting. So you were hiding it from yourself, right? And now I think Debbie's point about habits that have deeper connections is just true for everything, right? Like when I think
it is true for everything. And so sometimes I always work on this iceberg analogy. So to me, habits is somewhere in the middle, right? But because there's definitely habits that are formed and ingrained, and we have to, nothing changes unless we shift behavior. So we do need to look at small shifts in behavior for new outcome. But underneath it, at the ocean floor, is always the childhood stuff. And to be able to make that connect sometimes loosens up something that helps us finally make that behavior change. Right? Because I have to stay connected to my father in another way other than my love of sweets for me to give up my sweets. Right. And I just use that as an example because it's the one that's most present for me.
And I think of you as such a healthy eater. For all of you, you might be interested to know that Debbie, aren't you vegan? Debbie doesn't even wear leather clothing. In fact, one of my favorite funny facts about Debbie, as a therapist, they don't tell you personal things, but somehow she once told me that she had bought a new car, like a fancy car, and she was having the leather seats taken out and replaced with cloth.
No.
That was really crazy.
No, it's a little bit, that's a modified. I had leased a car. When my lease was up, I asked them to give me vegan leather. And they could not do it for me. They could, except for the wheel. And so I changed brands of car because I don't see the reason why I have to sit on animals. So yes. So I am a healthy food eater, but I eat sweets. So even if they're vegan sweets, they're still sweets.
I know. I love vegan sweets. I've had to cut those out too. I know. So if you don't mind, let's use this impatience thing for me. I'm curious as an example, because that is not a resolution for me. It was kind of a joke. Like I'm famously impatient, and it actually drives my boyfriend crazy. I mean, not crazy, but he'll say, you have to be more patient. So if I really wanted to work on being more patient, I don't know what I would do exactly.
Well, in the moment when the impatience started to come up, you would have to sort of take a step back, remove yourself from the situation and start asking yourself questions of what's coming up for me that's irritating me so much that I'm about to get angry about something and not be able to sort of be empathic to what's going on the other side. Impatience is a deeper dive versus just a behavior shift, right? You need to connect to your frustration, your needs being frustrated in the moment, your frustration tolerance is low. It has everything to do with not getting your needs met young. And so you would have to do that work with yourself and sort of concretely step away before reacting to something and then coming back with a more calm response.
Right. And you're right.
Impatience is a needs intolerance or frustration intolerance because it needs your childhood needs were not met in a way that you can tolerate when you can't get what you need right away.
And it is a lack of, how it comes across certainly, or how it functions, this is a lack of empathy, right? I'm impatient, I'm brusque, I want to move on. Like, I don't really care what's going on the other side.
Correct.
Which isn't really fair.
Correct.
And it's not really ever been something I've been wanting to work on that much.
But maybe we should work on it. Maybe that's not a bad idea.
Maybe that should be what my other resolution, besides a little distance from my kids. Eileen in the audience says, when we discover a bad habit, the knee-jerk reaction is to get rid of the habit, which is not the point. Can keep the ritual of eating something delicious with your father in your present life. Switch it to delicious, not sweet. Oh, that's sweet.
That is sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very nice.
I'm attempting. So far, a little successful. We'll see how it goes.
Have you tried dates? I love dates.
I do love dates. Yes.
Dates are really good, but
they're filled with sugar.
They're full of sugar. Yeah.
Mhm.
Karen says, I have an overall goal of being healthier, and there are about 9 things I can do to get there. E.g., each day I want to get a cardio workout, track my food, eat a fruit, eat a veggie, meditate for 5 minutes, drink 64 ounces of water, etc. It's very impressive. My new approach this year is that I give myself a gold star if I get 5 done each day. I don't need to get all 9, so I don't feel like I've failed if I don't get to all of them each day. It seems to be working so far, and I like seeing my gold stars, so I'm motivated to get to the 5. That's kind of a great, Karen, I'm wondering if you feel like talking. I'm curious if you have them written down, because those are a lot of things to keep track of. Like, do you X them off every day? I don't know, but I like that idea, because doing all 9 would be a lot.
Yeah. And that falls under the 80-20 rule, right? We all have these grand goals. She's happy to speak. That's great.
Raise your hand.
We all have these grand goals, and we think we have to get them all done all the time. And no one can do that unless you're living on a mountaintop and that's all that you're doing. So if you can get things done 80% of the time, that's a success for anything you're trying to do or change.
Yeah. 80% of the time. All right. That seems like
80-20 rule. Mm-hmm.
So what did you get better at last year, and what are you trying to get better at this year, Debbie?
Wait, is Karen not coming on?
She hasn't yet. I've hit the chat button, but it's not.
Oh, because she
Maybe
said
it's
she
not
wanted to
working.
speak. What have I gotten better at? Well, I have so far have kept with my goal that I'm going to work out, move almost every day. And so days that I start work at 7 a.m. I don't end till 7 p.m. Those days I wasn't moving for 3 days in a row. And so now I'm getting up at 5 in the morning and making sure to move before I start my work day. So that is something I've been very successful with and very happy about.
All right, but what about emotionally? Like, because I really liked your idea, what you said in the beginning is that the new year is a time to reflect on where you grew last year and where you're going. Like, that's pretty powerful. Like, I had a lot change last year with the Wolfer, right? I sold the Wolfer. I started a job. I haven't worked in a job in years, like this, in a company. I just think that's powerful. So,
So I will tell you, I have a whole bunch. So I just which one do I want to talk about? One thing from a very personal place is I've always had this experience emotionally, and it came from my mom, where things would wound me too easily with the people in my life. Like, I had very high expectations of how it should go, or what needs should be met, or what I expect of people because of what I give to people. And that has been a ongoing reflection of, when it comes up, what does it mean? Is it real? Or should I be upset? Shouldn't I be upset? And I've been working on that, reflecting on that. And I've had huge breakthroughs where it actually might have broken open. So that's one of the deeper things that I'm keeping an eye on personally.
You were getting your feelings hurt too easily, and you were aware
yes,
that it wasn't really about the other person so much. It was something else.
Correct. And that's been an ongoing, lifelong reflection, and it's gotten better and better and better and better. And I do believe this year I may have licked it, because it hasn't shown up, so, and this is also a lesson. Like, I was in my own therapy before I ever opened up my office for 10 years. I stayed in 16 straight years of therapy. There's no one more analyzed than me. And I do this all day, every day. And there's still things that are not licked, right? They live inside of you. Yes.
Right. Shrink them, but they come up at times. Right. They're always going to be there.
Sometimes you shrink them enough where they stop showing up. So this is the one that I'm hoping I've shrunk it enough and reflected enough that it's not going to show up anymore, but I can keep you posted.
Well, I think that's a really good example, though, of something that you're going to keep working on. I mean, it's just, I like the story also because it's just proof that we continue to get better if we work on ourselves, right? And I think my stuff with my kids has gotten so much better, and I have more work to do. I want to get better at it. I want to keep working at it because I think it'll help all of us, but particularly them, And so, but Cindy from the audience says that she relates to what you're talking about. And she says, but I try to lower my expectations, but how low can you go? Which is it's always hard you have to assess, right?
It's not about lowering expectations. It's about shifting, and about learning that we don't all give love in the same way. And if we can pay attention to how someone's loving us, even though it's different than the way we're loving them, and that if someone doesn't meet our needs in the exact way that we had hoped, it doesn't mean they don't love us. It's really a shift in perception and perspective. And I share my feelings with the close people in my life. And I have one best friend, and I've known her since I'm 10. And she is more innocent and not as evolved, let's say, in this crap than I am. And she teaches me the most because she just comes out and says it so simplistically. And she has been teaching me. She's been my teacher in this my whole life because we've had to work on it the most. And it's really helpful to recognize that I'm getting too wounded and she is loving me. This is just the way she knows how to love me.
Just the way
Period.
she is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not personal.
Yeah. Angela asks, how do you vet the difference though between what should or should not be? And that's a complicated question without context, Angela. So if you want to speak up, we'd love to hear from you.
I will tell you guys what therapy does, right? It's clarity, right? I might have said this before, but it's so important. We all come from childhoods and we have blueprints in us and we have certain wounds, and all based on how it went with mother and father. And so we grow up chronologically, but inside we're still filtering in information from a very young place. And so however it went young, whatever happens present day, we filter in that information if it's happening present day, but it doesn't necessarily belong there. And so it's really clearing away our own lens. So my wound that I was taking out on other people, that's my wound. It wasn't for them to fill or to fix or to heal. And once I started to heal that, my perception shifted.
Do you, this is a weird question, Debbie, but do you remember ever as an adult feeling, they talk about like your inner child, like, do you remember like when you're with your parents, do you sometimes feel like a child in familiar situations, family situations? Do you act out childhood stuff? Or do you feel like you've reached a place in your life, a maturity where you no longer do that?
I'm going to say 97% of the time I've reached a place of adulthood that I don't do that. Every once in a while with my mother, old stuff comes up and I don't have a handle on it. Right. Yeah. But I'm going to say mostly I've grown up. Right. So the whole point of this is to grow your insides up to match your outsides, of a woman in her 50s who's competent and all of these things and so well analyzed, not responding to her from this very childlike place. But people always respond from the child's place until they don't. And that's the whole point of growing your insides up to match your outsides. It's not a chronological thing.
Yeah, I really realized that lately, sorry, we're not getting a lot of questions, so I'm just going to chit chat with you about it. But because I realized that obviously I used to act out all the time and behave from a really place of childhood. And I felt often in my rage against my parents, whether I was dealing with my father in person or not, I felt like a child when I thought about my parents, and I don't anymore. And it's super interesting. Like, I don't even, like, I miss my mother and I'll have moments where I miss my mother, but I don't miss my mother like I used to in my 30s or my 40s at all. Yeah. Like, I'm like, my mother's dead and it's okay. And, but I had a fight with my brother recently, a really stupid fight with my brother where we both ended up saying, fuck you, and hanging up on each other. And it was literally like I was 8 years old. Like, I actually laughed when I hung up the phone. I was like, we are retarded. And then I called him. But it was really a moment of like going back to childhood. So I think it's interesting to be aware of that. Like, when you're really struggling with something, are you being your best adult self, or are you actually like?
Well, anytime you have a big reaction to something that doesn't deserve it, you're not. Yeah. Right. That's the tell, and I would implore everybody listening to think about sort of the deeper things in us that we're working hard to shift, like, what are the evergreen issues that we have that we carry with us all the time, no matter how old we get, right? Like, another one for me is I definitely have a lot of separation stuff. And I always, even when Nina was my client, I used to say to her, like, we're so different. I used to marvel, and I still do. Like, Nina at the drop of a hat gets up and can go travel for 2 months at a time, and she doesn't care, where I am such a homebody. Like, leaving the house always creates a separation issue for me. I have very deep separation issues. So I've always done and gone and traveled, but never cleanly. There's always some pain involved. There's, so as I learned about this, I would always go and I would suffer a bit. And as I worked on it, I would suffer a little less and a little less. And then what happened is I ended up with cancer, breast cancer, and I ended up with a breathing issue from a vocal cord issue at the same time. Anyway, that went on for 3 years. And then when I was finally better before COVID hit, I tried to go on 2 different trips. And each time I got sick and couldn't go. And I knew that that was emotional. And I was like, oh shit, I can't separate from home because I've now been home for 3 years and I haven't left. Right. So I vowed that I was going to go away, and someone was a best friend was like, I'm getting on a plane with you. We're getting you out of the house. And then COVID hit. So I haven't been on a plane in 4.5 years. My reflection is I have booked a trip for February and I don't care where COVID is. I'm getting on the plane, and I'm.
Well, I was kind of interested as you were telling this story. I was wondering if you were going to say you forced yourself to do it, or you're accepting that you don't want to do it. I mean, those are two very.
No, because I know that I like to travel. I've traveled the world, and I'm okay with it's going to hurt a little bit, and it's a traumatic experience that happened to me because I couldn't breathe well, and I've been afraid to get on a plane. But I am going, everybody. So I think I'm over it. And I'll let you know after my February.
We'll be watching. We'll be here. All right. Kathleen in the audience has 2 questions. One is, can you talk about the habit of worry? That's one of mine. And then she also says she'd like to hear about your vocal cord issue because she's facing that now.
Oh, well, what vocal cord issue is she facing?
I don't know. She's facing a vocal cord issue. Maybe.
Well, what is her issue?
I don't know. Kathleen, you're going to have to let us know what your vocal cord issue is. Now we're getting some other questions, so we'll come back to you, Kathleen.
Okay. So vocal cord paralysis. Okay. So I had surgery and then I couldn't breathe. And they, of course, think it's all these other things. And I went through all sorts of testing and it was none of those things. And then they thought it was psychiatric. And I was like, no. And so I finally found an ENT. I had something called vocal neuropathy, where one of my vocal cords collapsed in. And so it was weakened. So when your vocal cords work, they work, you talk, and then they open. Mine were staying shut and I couldn't get air in. You correct that through vocal rehab and it worked. And it was fantastic. But it took a long time to diagnose. Nobody thought of it. So that was the issue.
Horrible. It's horrible when they think things are psychological. Where are you going in February?
I'm going to California, which I used to do a ton of TV, and I would go to California like every other month, and I haven't been in 5 years.
North or south?
I'm going to LA.
Nice. Do you know where you're staying?
I think we're going to be in an Airbnb. It's a bunch of us going, and we have a lot of plans all over the place. So yeah, I'm very excited. Thank you.
LA.
And the habit of worry, that's something that requires some more psychological depth to it, and sort of like what's fueling. When people worry, there's a lot of anxiety, and anxiety is not a feeling, it's a symptom that you're not feeling something. So, there would be a lot of questions I asked, and also to keep in mind the old adage of like 99% of the things that we worry about are not the things that we end up having to worry about. It's such a waste of time and energy, and you're not living in your present day life. But I do think it's masking you not feeling something about yourself, and that's the best I can do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting statement, though. Anxiety is a symptom. I think you said a symptom of a feeling you're not expressing.
Anxiety and depression. I'm not talking about clinical stuff. I'm talking about, more on the neurotic, normal spectrum. Anxiety and depression, people say, I feel anxious or I feel depressed. Those are not feelings. Those are symptoms that you're not feeling. Because if you were feeling, you wouldn't have anxiety and you wouldn't be flat from depression. You'd be sad, you'd be angry, you'd be helpless, you'd be lots of things that maybe don't feel good. You wouldn't be anxious and depressed.
Right. If you were really looking at what was really bothering you deep down.
Yes, exactly.
You'd be digging into it. And
then experience the emotion, and then you wouldn't have the symptom.
Yeah. So I think that your separation from home thing is interesting. I think this idea of, sorry, we're jumping around a lot, but identifying, as Debbie said, she encourages everyone here and all of our listeners to think about the things that you want to work on, right? Think about the themes that kind of plague you. And then from year to year, maybe you can get a little bit better and a little bit better. You know, I've identified a couple of mine. I'm sure I have many, many others. You know, impatience and kind of boundaries with the kids. What's another one of yours?
Well, I was going to also just add in, you know, this becomes really important to everyone. And that's why it's reflections and not resolutions, because it's always a work in progress. I can tell you, proof positive, I thought that these two things that I brought up to you were gone because they've been asleep for so long, because I worked on them so many years ago. But when changes happen in your life, things can wake up. So people think their issues have disappeared, but no, when something new happens, they can resurface, right? So my separation issues, which I had mostly licked, like I was down to the point where like I would feel some sadness when I left my door, my home. And as soon as I was at the airport, I felt fine, versus in the past, I would suffer for 3 weeks wherever I went, right? Like I remember, you know, so it really was so nothing. And all of a sudden it was back as if I didn't work on it for a day. But I also went through cancer and surgeries and not being able to breathe. So it brought it up.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
The wounded thing, I thought I licked that too. But then I moved to a neighborhood that all of a sudden I was in the same neighborhood with all my closest friends, where I was in the city and they were here. And all of a sudden our lives merged in a different way, and everything, there was a whole mix up.
You were just getting your feelings hurt right and left because you're
so
surrounded.
all of a sudden this thing that I thought was gone woke up, right? So it's very important to know that it's always a work in progress, and our themes stay. We always have to keep an eye on them because they may show up, even though you think, like I have a client who always was insecure with boys and, you know, men, and was cheated on, blah, blah, blah. She's now been married and she says, I would never go back to that behavior. I'm like, that's what you think. But if you lost your husband tomorrow, your insecurities might come up. They've been asleep because he has been masking that you feel secure now. Right.
Well,
So
you say that to me all the time too. Like if I weren't in a relationship, I would probably, you know, be frantic for a relationship or whatever.
right, you feel better about yourself in the world with a guy.
Right.
So a lot of people think their things are gone, but and that's why the first person who brought up the patience, I'm curious to know if that patience stays once COVID is over and she's out in the world again, because right now she's in again. So that's what I'm looking at. Like, is it based on circumstance, or is it a real shift?
Right. Well, so that's a good point that I just want to, sometimes I like to like accentuate the points you're making that are really good. Like we have these themes, they recur, we can shrink them and we can continue year after year to try and get a little better, but we have to be aware that they're always under trauma, under stress. They can always kind of come flaring back, and we can't beat ourselves up about that. We just have to deal with it. Nancy,
and then you put them to sleep again.
And you can put them to sleep
more
again.
Quickly if you're aware of them.
If you're aware. Nancy in the audience asks, can we hear an example of the idea that worry, anxiety is a symptom? I mean, I can think of lots of things.
You go.
Well, I mean, if you think of any anxious person, Nancy, like I think of lots of anxious people in my life, they spend all their time worrying about things that, as Debbie said, aren't going to happen, right? Like I used to be very anxious in my 20s. So I spent a lot of time worrying about getting AIDS or my brother dying in a car accident. I would worry about disasters happening. But what I wasn't looking at my trauma of my mother dying. I mean, I knew my mother had died, obviously, and I knew that I was really sad, but I wasn't unpacking. Well, maybe Debbie can explain it better now, but the anxiety was really a symptom of what I wasn't looking at in my own traumatic history. So I let it be about all that. And I see that a lot, like particularly you see anxious kids a lot. I mean, I think we deal with, you know, there's a lot of anxiety around us all the time. And you see people who are focusing on stuff that doesn't really matter. And they're not really looking at what the real problem is.
You know, I mean, like a classic example is like in a marriage, someone doesn't have a voice and is constantly angry at their significant other, feeling hurt, whatever it is. And instead of feeling their anger, they're anxious all the time and they're running around all the time. Or people's ailments come out, you know, people have ailments in their bodies because they're not addressing their feelings. It's all the same thing. If you're not dealing with yourself and you're just focused on the worry, you're hiding from yourself.
Right.
It's defense against something that you're not allowing yourself to experience, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger at someone, whether it's fear, whether it's helplessness.
And depression can very much be the same thing. I spent years and years where I would go in and out of kind of mild depressions, and I would say I'm depressed and I would cry, but I wasn't allowing myself to really sit with what was really bothering me underneath. So I would allow myself to kind of be in this like place, but I wasn't really digging into what was hard.
It's a red herring. It's a camouflage of what's actually happening.
Right. Dawn had a question that someone else said is her question too. One of my big challenges this year is connection with people and making new friends. This year, I'm challenged by retiring, moving, and COVID. Revel is amazing for meeting women, but how do we re-enter a new world as we come out of COVID?
And that's a really big question. You know, I don't think I know when COVID is over. I think we're going to be living with COVID. So let's start there. But I do think COVID is going to become something that we have a cure for. You get strep throat, you go get an antibiotic, you get COVID, you go get a pill and you're fine. And so it's really going to be back to where we were, where it's still hard to make friends, even without COVID. You have to join things. You have to push yourself out into, discomfort, which I do think is going to be a little extra hard for people because we've been in so long and everyone's been in. So it's almost like no need to push yourself. But if you want to make new friends, I mean, this is simply wherever you are, you have to join things and you have to have common activities that you like, and you have to just get involved in something. They're not going to show up.
100%. And my like little coachy thing that I just wrote in the chat to that is ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Because I struggle with this in Revel. Like I am really finding so much pleasure out of creating all these events for myself that I want to do. Like I go to galleries and I go ice skating and I go roller skating and women show up and I get to meet them. And it's really fun. And separate from the fact that I work at Revel, it's really been surprising to me. I didn't have a bunch of events over Christmas and I missed them. And so I feel sad for all the women who are afraid to create some, to do things like that, to just kind of create some events and make some friends. And you have to ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Also, you may want to tap into, maybe there's some people that you already know that you've never really pursued a friendship with, that you never had time to pursue a friendship with. I always start with like, who's already in the roster, right? Is there someone at work? Is there an old friend from high school? Is there someone that up until now, there hasn't been the opportunity or the wherewithal? Are you holding yourself back because you're afraid of rejection? All of those things tap into, and that's a great thing to say, Nina.
Yeah. And fear of rejection is totally real, except that's another one where it's like, honestly, most rejection is not even about you. Like we think it's about us, but most of the time rejection is not really about you. It's about that the other person may like blondes better than dark-haired women, or may have like a mother at home who has cancer, or like people have all sorts of shit going on that's just not about you.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really matter. And also the other thing I've come to really embrace as I've gotten a little older is like, even if it is about me, like if someone doesn't want to be with me, I don't want to be with them. So like, who cares? Like there's someone else I'd want to be with, right? Like, I don't want to be in a situation that's not fun.
Yes. But I will say that that's easier for you than the average human, right? And that's okay. Everyone just has to look at their level of are they holding themselves back because they're afraid of what that's going to feel like if somebody actually doesn't want them. Yeah. And again, and you're not wrong, the perception versus reality. I always go back to the narcissism. We're all in our own orbits and we think we personalize everything that everyone does.
Right.
But it still can be hard for people.
It still can be totally hard. I guess what that makes me think of though is the whole conversation about anxiety and depression, and that when something's hard, it's much better to just look at it and say, this is hard and better for you, better, ultimately healthier than to like allow yourself to get anxious that people are going to reject you and worry and then get depressed. Like, okay, sometimes, I don't know, writing sometimes helps. Like you can write it down and be like, I had this experience and I was rejected and it didn't feel good or it wasn't fun. And then you can kind of look at it and be like, okay, that was hard. And now maybe I'm going to try again differently. I know that I am making it sound easier than not, but I want everyone to get out there.
Yeah. I also want to say one thing too, in terms of like, we're talking about reflections or resolutions or whatever we want to do in the new year. I think that everyone needs to also start with acceptance. And what I mean by that is oftentimes I hear this 1,000 times a day, I just wish I wasn't this. I wish this was easier. I wish a unicorn would show up in my room, right? Like, we have to take who we are and figure out what we can do with it versus railing against it, right? And so I have separation issues. Mine roots back to Holocaust. My parents are Holocaust survivors, right? It was given to me, right? I grew up in Hewlett, Long Island. I didn't grow up in the Holocaust, but yet I grew up with separation issues because of that, right? I can say, God, this sucks. I hate this, that I have to suffer every time I go away and I want to travel the world. Or you accept, like, every time I go away, I'm going to have to deal with a little bit of pain. And I know that I'll get over it, right? Or whatever anyone's suffering with. And I only use an example so people have an example.
Yeah.
You have to accept where you are in order to go someplace new. If you rail against where you are, it keeps you stuck. And that is so important for no matter what it is. You have to accept where you are in order to get somewhere new.
Yeah. And I think I can I think for me, the thing that I think of is the pain I felt on vacation, where I was with my kids and I was feeling, I'm sure a lot of us who are parents have felt this, where I was feeling kind of judgmental and kind of left out. And I spent a lot of the vacation, like late at night, revisiting their childhoods and thinking about things that I had done wrong or that I felt guilty about. And I got divorced when they were young, and it was kind of torture. But I have to look at those feelings and accept that I have them, that they're painful, that I have painful memories that don't make me feel good, that make me wish I had done things differently. I have to look at them in order to try and do better. Because if I don't look at them, I'm just going to feel anxious and miserable.
But what you do is you go backwards and you move forward. You don't want to get stuck in those feelings, like these regretful feelings. Sometimes people feel like, I wish I had done it different, or I wish things were different. It's okay to feel it, but don't get stuck there, which you are good at. You do not get stuck there. You move.
Well, I have, but this time it was hard for me. I mean, it actually took me like 10 days after getting back from this vacation to kind of find my equilibrium again. Where like that balance of like not wanting to deny what the feelings were, but moving forward and feeling okay. And it's really stuff that I learned in therapy. I mean, I must have, because I was not good at this before.
Yes, of course you did.
So, all right. Well, this is great. Well, this has been another great conversation, Debbie. We're going to kind of come up. I think we should come up with a way. I mean, I love having the audience talk, and maybe one day we'll do one of these where we'll invite a few people in. I don't know. I'll think creatively about it, but I think the conversation is fabulous. I just love it.
I would love to do like a group thing where people can get involved and we can open up and I can answer lots of questions and give people insight into their life, not just an hour. Like now we're giving insights into our lives.
I know we're doing it just as a way of example, and I hope it helps. Exactly. Yeah. But we could definitely do that with a larger group. Well, thank you, Tricia. I'm glad it was great. And I'd love feedback from the audience, guys. Please feel free. I would actually I beg you to write to me and tell me how you think these are and how you think we could do them better. You can write to me at Nina@Hello Revel, or you can message me on the platform. Kathleen says other people's examples help me too. Yeah. I mean, that's the only reason I bring up stuff from my life and Debbie's, is because I figure it's going to help. So the one real takeaway, though, I hope everyone will take away, because I think it's really good, is think about what you improved upon, like take stock of last year in an emotional way, and think about what you want to keep improving on, not in the resolution-y way, like I'm going to lose 10 pounds, but more emotionally.
And I just want to add to that, always keep my iceberg, right? Like at the tip, I moved, right? That was a very concrete thing I did. That was a big change, right? At the ocean floor is the separation stuff, this wound stuff, and it's all working together. So I want people to think on all the levels, right? Like the most obvious to the middle ground to the ocean floor of childhood crap that keeps coming up. And if you can get those going in terms of awareness, you can really make a lot of strides this year.
Yeah. I'm excited for this year, and I'm seeing my psychic next week.
Well, like I said, who needs me? There's a psychic. So let us know what she does for you this year.
All right, Debbie, we'll talk next month. I'll see you in February. When is your trip? The beginning of February?
After our next
one.
So we won't know if I actually made it until
I can't remember what we're talking about in February. I'll have to look it up.
Yes.
I don't remember, but anyway, it's in the app. You can find it on the Revel platform. Thank you, everyone. Big hug.
Thanks, everyone. Bye,
Okay,
Nina.
bye. Talk to you later.
Yes,
Yeah, someone says you need to move to LA.
that's very sweet.